a white woman's perspective, you know, like I suppose a middle-class white perspective, the way my life is at the moment. I listen to that inspirational talk from Saj. They aren't my experiences. I'm in awe of those things. But I do want to be part of this. If I'm silent, am I compliant? I have been working in education a long time. I'm still not 100% sure how to do this in a meaningful way. Neil.
Yeah. And that is the challenge, really, and it's a challenge that I think is particularly, as we've said before, particularly relevant to Cumbria, because there isn't that element of diversity around. Now, I've mentioned before that my background's in youth work, and as part of that, probably 25 years ago, we set up a project called MUnit. Well, it actually got set up by young people of colour who wanted to meet in a safe environment, talk about some of the issues they had, but in a way that was fun and celebratory about being black, being brown, or being from a diverse heritage background. And that group met weekly, and it became a kind of a group where they explored going into schools, doing videos and doing projects which told their stories and challenges they had through the education system, which include racism, which include incidents of hate crime, but it also included just simply looking different and walking through the lanes or through the school, and people looking at them on a sideways glance because they weren't the same as everyone else around them. Now, this group grew to become grew older, really, basically. When we're 20 years later, they're still developing projects. They're still looking to be able to do work from a slightly different perspective. And I think that's part, for me, of my journey, is that in the past, I've looked at inclusion in projects about setting up something that's a safe space for people of colour. And I think there is a place for that. I think within youth work, though, the challenge is how do you integrate, and Saj put it excellently before, how do you integrate within youth work people of colour so that they don't feel different? And I think that's also the challenge for the education system. How do you integrate people of colour, stories of colour, and make them part of something that everybody is able to enjoy and access? What we did in MUnit was we wanted to do celebrations of local people of colour. So the photographs on the right was an exhibition, which was photographs of people of colour from the Carlisle community. So it was really relevant, really local to Carlisle. And it would be people that everyone's seen and everyone knows. But these people have made a huge difference in the city just by being non-white and going about their everyday business. Some are councillors, some are campaigners, but some are actually just people who go shopping through the streets and get looked at, and they make a big difference just by being themselves.
Okay, so this one, I do some consultancy work for a national competition and school resource called Poetry by Heart, which is funded by the DFE, and the screenshot is of the timeline. So there are hundreds of poems on the timeline, and I did take a screenshot there of some which do include poets of colour, but we're currently expanding the resources that we have for primary school pupils, and I'm part of doing that and looking at what poems we want to include. A very high proportion of young people that take part in the competition are non-white. So clearly, for everybody, those pupils and for everybody, it's really important that the resource is representative. It's a very, very difficult to find poetry that isn't of the names that just come up time and time again. If you Google it, Benjamin Zephaniah will come up top of the list every single time. Very, very hard. In an American context, it's a little bit easier if you look for American work, but still difficult. So there are some big names that are out there, but the same names that are coming up time and time again. And finding poets from Asian heritage is actually even more difficult, and Far Eastern Chinese heritage much more difficult again. There's lots of Chinese poetry, but less that is accessible to non-Chinese speaking people. So I'd asked the question before, how far have we come? In part of my personal journey, I was also reflecting, and this, when I talk about racism, it's important for me to say these things, but I grew up in the northeast in South Shields in the 1970s, and low-key racism was pretty much rife. People are aware of that image, I'm sure, love thy neighbour. I don't need to spell that out. Yeah, casual racism was pretty much standard. And it's tempting to think that that's very far back. In 2007, there was a big furore on Big Brother. People may be aware of that probably, where Jade Goody, sadly now no longer with us, made a racist comment against the Bollywood actress Shilpa Shetty. And there was a big outcry in the media at the time. And it was terrible, but I remember thinking, well, the reason that Jade Goody is saying that is because people still say those things in everyday conversation. That casual racism is still there. It may not be there in the media, but it's still there in people's lives. These are images from my daughter's school Instagram feed, and round about the Black Lives Matter protests earlier in the summer. A lot of children were clearly inspired by that and were producing things in their artwork that are fantastic. So we're at a point in time where I think a lot of young people's imaginations are captured by some of these issues. I asked my daughter if she hears racist things said, and she says yes, regularly, every day, just in the language that people are using, and sometimes in the way that people treat each other. So on the one hand, I think we have come a long way. On the other hand, I think possibly people still are saying things that I might have heard in South Shields in the 1970s. So really, to sum up, I guess, and there are more questions and answers, I think we have to be very honest about our joint personal experiences. I think the power of this group is that Cumbria needs to think for itself, Carlisle needs to think for itself about what these issues mean to us. It may not be the same as if we were creating resources in Multicultural Manchester or wherever it may be. I hope the university's got a role. I definitely offer my interest in that, and as a councillor and as somebody involved in the third sector, I definitely think there's a role for all of us, and I hope that's a good thing that comes from today. I'm worried I'm overrunning nearly. Neil, do you want to say anything to finish off?
No, I think that the key for me is that local aspect of it and the local groups. And this conference is a great example of being able to to be able to meet, discuss the issues. And what I hope comes from this at the end of today is some real challenges going out there to districts and county councils, to the third sector, and to any organisation who really has a willingness to look at the issues locally and do something about it.
Okay, I think that's all we want to say, but thank you very much for listening. I don't know if there's time for questions, but thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karen Lockney and Niall McNulty. We do have somebody, we have a question from Praveen Dalmani, said that shades of colour are a real issue within the Black and Asian communities. How you are viewed within our own community. Are you able to sort of explain a bit more about that? So I believe that they're saying that even within our own communities, the different colour shades, whether how light you are, how dark you are, touching a bit, almost what Neil was saying, that you were different from the community in Leeds. So what's your opinion on that? I mean, what do you think?
I mean, I think there's even within our own group. So MUnit had a massive discussion about whether we use BAME, people of colour, black, brown, and it was almost got to the point where it was dominating what the work that we were doing and what we were trying to do. So I think it's definitely something that we need to discuss as people of colour. But I also think it's one of the things that we could get really hung up on, and the commonalities that are there around people who are brown or black is that we aren't white. And I know that Anti-Racist Cumbria has similarly had those conversations and gone down the route of like just looking at the issue, which is racism, and that's what combines people of colour and people who aren't white in this country at the current time. But it's definitely a discussion. But for me, it could be something that sidetracks us away from some of the real important issues to focus on.
Yeah, and I would say as well that if we are going to make resources for ourselves within Cumbria, and I do believe we should do that, because I don't think anyone is going to do it for us in the way that we need it in this context, because only Cumbrians understand the context that we're in. And I just reflect on that in my first slide about teaching in East London versus Cumbria. So one of the things I learned in East London was the racism between communities, particularly between certain aspects of the Afro-Caribbean community to certain aspects of the Asian community. And that, I mean, that complexity wouldn't be something that that people in my daughter's white school would necessarily understand. So if we were going to explore that, we'd need to do some teaching and education about it here. That would be all I would think on that point.
Right, the teaching and education that you're talking about, do you feel that in regards to your daughter's school, or even my children as well, do you feel that it's the primary sources, which is the households, because we are talking about educating schools and children, but isn't it more about educating the primary source, which is the household, which is the parents, the older generations? How could we sort of broaden that? How could we address that? Is she gone?
Is it possible to intervene here? Hello?
We've got somebody who's just joined.
Yeah.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. I don't know how that. I'm so sorry.
I'm not on.
Sorry. I'm not sure of the answer to that question, to be totally honest. I was going to say optimistically that there's a possibility for children and young people to feed that education up through their family. I think I've probably done that in my own family, to be completely honest. So again, reflecting on my own experience, that's something that I guess is possible. I tend to think of it from the school's point of view. So it's hard for me to unthink that. I don't mean like.
I think one of the things that we've got in Cumbria, at least, is that people do watch the local media and read the local newspapers, and I think being able to have that celebration of colour, and it's sometimes easy for the newspapers and the media to report some of the negativities around racism and hate crime, and that's.
Your video's just frozen.
And celebrating that culture, and I think that's one way to be able to get across that things are getting better, and that people get across to those older adults that there is integrated, slowly multicultural community coming.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lockney and Niall McNulty. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences and giving an insight to raise young people and the curriculum. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.